Today we're going to talk about Chapter 21, Section 2, and that's the 1920s woman. And this is about how American women pursued new lifestyles and assumed new jobs and different roles in society during the 1920s. So the first thing we need to look at are fashion trends. We can learn a lot about fashion of a time. For example, by looking at a fashion known as the flapper, this encompassed an emancipated young woman. These women adopted the new fashions and attitudes of the time, such as shorter or looser fitting dresses. That means cutting hair short. Dresses were shorter. They would often dye their hair jet black instead of leaving it long in its natural color. We can also learn from this that many young women sought an equal status with men and would behave more assertively in the public sphere, and particularly in relationships with men. We can see evolving roles in marriage, not just from this style, but just from studies of the time period, that women began to see marriage as an equal partnership. Though generally, the role of most women in families was that of the original cult of domesticity, that a woman's place is to do housework and rear children. But we also see a double standard, and that is that elders disapproved of new behavior and its promotion by the media, that is through periodicals, be it magazines, newspapers, or advertisements. But nonetheless, the culture began to change. Casual dating began to replace formal courtship. That means that relationships were not necessarily tied to expectations about marriage, though typically women were subject to this double standard. That means that they were judged more harshly for the same behaviors that men might engage in. Now, after the First World War, as men began to return home, employers were also replacing female workers with men. There were opportunities for female college graduates, though, to become teachers or nurses or librarians. Many women went into clerical jobs in offices as secretaries or typists. Some even became sales clerks, some even working in factories, although there was a lack of equity, meaning that few women were able to rise to leadership positions as managers, and they were always paid less than men. Now, the family was also changing through the 1920s. The birth rate dropped, partly due to more birth control and information about it. Birth control, advocated by Margaret Sanger, actually led to a decreased number of children by American families. Manufactured products and public services gave homemakers more freedom, meaning more leisure time, allowing housewives to focus more on their families and even in many cases adopt pastimes or hobbies instead of devoting their entire days to housework. Marriages were seen increasingly based on romantic love and companionship versus practical necessity. And since children are spending most of their day at school now, since that's a possibility, and involved in organized activities such as sports, they were spending less time away from their parents. And in fact, there was no such thing as adolescence. This was a term invented by psychologists looking at the stages of development in human lives. And adolescence is a period where someone is not quite a child, but not quite an adult. And literature began to be published through the 1920s. And it was during this period of human development where adolescents resist parental control. Now, we also see women who are working, who have an education, being forced to juggle family and work. Sometimes this was called the two-job lifestyle or double job. That is the job of dealing with and supporting your family and then any outside job that women may have.
As the 1920s unfolded, the United States found itself in the economic driver's seat. Its economy was booming. A 10-year party broke out, the Roaring Twenties. The crazes of the 20s reflected the attitude of a people determined to enjoy prosperous times. Flappers in bobbed haircuts dancing the Charleston, the rise of jazz and blues music, alcohol was prohibited in 1920, but bootleg whiskey, supplied by very competitive gangsters, was smuggled into thousands of speakeasies. Times were good, jobs were plentiful, and people were starting to live the American dream. There was another craze that captured America's attention in the 20s, playing the stock market. Credit made it easy. You could buy any amount of stock for as little as 10% of its value and borrow the rest. Here's how it worked. If you wanted to buy 1,000 shares of a company's stock, which is priced at $10 a share, the total price would be $10,000. But you could purchase all 1,000 shares by paying only $1,000, 10% of the full price. This down payment is known as the margin. When the shares rose in value, as they always seemed to do in the 20s, you paid off the loan with your profits. This is called buying on margin, and as long as the value of the shares kept going up, everything would work out okay. But if the value of the shares dropped dramatically, you'd still be liable for the $9,000 loan. You'd still have to pay it back, and your broker would be putting pressure on you to do just that. By the mid-20s, the new popularity of playing the market and easy credit, of course, began to make stocks very much in demand, and that caused their value to keep rising. But this value was based on the demand for the stock, not the performance or actual worth of the company. As a result, the stock of most companies was greatly overvalued. At the same time, all through 1929, there were indications that domestic and foreign markets for manufactured goods, wheat, and steel were starting to slip. Europe had recovered from the war and was much less dependent on North American goods. And many countries had started to put tariffs on imports to protect their domestic markets. Unable to sell as much of their goods, American factories started to stockpile their products, but kept right on producing. By mid-1929, the market had started to show signs of instability. Sudden trading bursts and price drops became almost routine. Experts warned that a drastic correction was fast approaching. So there were signs, much of them ignored, that the marketplace was out of balance and that something had to shift.